So hello everyone. My name is Amund Kvalbein. I come from a company called Analysis Mason, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion on securing basic internet infrastructure. So the internet has proven fantastically resilient against a range of challenges to its operations. And there are many reasons for this. The internet protocols were designed for resilience from the beginning. They've been able to scale and adapt as the internet has grown. And today it is the dominant platform for communication and information sharing. The internet is often referred to as a network of networks, and this distributed model of operations for the internet has proven to work very well. But today, I think it's fair to say that this network of networks is also a network of data centers and subsea cables. The move to the cloud and now also the advent of AI has made these core physical building blocks of the internet immensely important. We all rely on them every day as a society and as individuals. So with this dependence, it becomes all the more important to understand more about the vulnerabilities of this basic infrastructure, and that is the ambition of this workshop today. So warm welcome to all of you. And to discuss this important matter, I've been so lucky to gather with me a prominent set of panelists here. So what we'll do now, I will just briefly introduce these panelists. And then we will talk a little bit more about how you in the audience, and both here in Oslo and also online, can participate in this workshop. So with me on the stage here today, we have first Dr. Olaf Kolkman. Olaf is an astronomer by training. I don't know much about his career in astronomy, but I do know that he has a long and very active career in internet technology and policy development. And today Olaf is the principal for internet technology, policy and advocacy with the Internet Society. Next, I have with me Petra Arts. Petra is an experienced public policy professional. She has experience from the European Parliament and from several private companies. The last 5 years she has worked for Cloudflare, and today she is Director for Public Policy for Europe in Cloudflare. Jumping now to online, we have with us, not here in the hall today, but online over Zoom, Johannes Theis. Johannes plays a central role in the EU's work on the resilience of basic internet infrastructure. He is a political science major who has worked on internet policy questions for the German Broadband Association and for Vodafone, and today he's the head of sector for the EU's Directorate General for Communication Networks, Content and Technology. Here in the panel next we have with us Elise Lindeberg. Elise has worked many years for the Norwegian Regulatory Authority for Telecoms, most recently there as the Director for Security and Resilience in Networks. She has been active in internet policy development in ICANN and the IGF for many years, but a bit more than a year ago she made a career change from the regulatory side, and today she's the CEO of Skygard, which is a data center hosting company here in Oslo. Last but not least, we have with us Erika Moret. She's a former diplomat and scholar with education from France's École Nationale d'Administration and a PhD from Oxford University, where she studied the effects of sanctions on Cuba's economy, very interestingly. She has had a long and distinguished career in international policy development. Today she's based in Geneva, where she is the director for United Nations and international organizations at Microsoft. So a warm round of applause and welcome to our panelists. Very soon, these panelists are going to give an introduction to this topic and where they're coming from on that topic. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce also Michael Kende, my colleague, who is the online moderator for this event. So Michael will be monitoring the chat here and take any questions that you might post in the chat and bring them here to the audience in due time. We also have another way for you in the audience, both online and here in Oslo, to interact with this workshop, and that is Mentimeter, or Menti. Some of you might know this tool. So on your screens now, you can basically just see a question. So just to introduce Menti as a tool, for those of you who want, you can either scan this QR code with your camera, or you can go to menti.com and type in this code that is written on the screen. And we'll use this a couple of times during the workshop for you to voice your opinion on some of these questions. So just as a starter to warm you up to this tool, you can go in there and click where you're originally from. I guess many of you are in Oslo today, but just to show a little bit the breadth of the audience that we have with us today. Okay, with that introduction and without further ado, we will run this now so that each of the panelists will, as I said, get a few minutes to introduce themselves and where they are coming from and their thoughts on today's topic. Then we will have a discussion in the panel. I will ask you some questions. You might ask each other questions. And then we will also open up for questions from the audience in due course. So please prepare your questions for these panelists. So first, Olaf, will you give us your perspective on securing basic internet resilience?
Yes, I will try so. By the way, I'm not a doctor. I never wrote a thesis. I found internet working more interesting than gazing at stars. So I basically, during the PhD research, moved careers. Only Dr. Anders. But let's talk a little bit about resiliency in the internet and what is important to that. And I want to do that on the basis of an example, namely the cable cuts on 14 March near the west coast of Africa. There were 4 cables cut at that day because of a tectonic plate shift or a micro earthquake or something. And that had an enormous impact on the region. What that impact was basically connectivity. A lot of capacity to connect outwards disappeared. The internet has always been reliant on subsea cable networks. When the first networks were laid in the US as part of the ARPANET, obviously that was always terrestrial. But as soon as Europe was connected, we needed subsea cables. And after that, they've been a hallmark of connectivity across the globe. Anyway, 4 cables were cut. There were still a number of uncut cables in that region. And what happened is that the West African internet community collaborated together. That's what you do when you collaborate, to find alternative routes. The internet itself routes around problems. It does that by a protocol called the Border Gateway Protocol, a system called routing, but you also basically have to make sure that the connections are there. That was work that was done way in advance of the cable cuts. And parts of that are having the policy, the infrastructure, the capacities all in-house to be able to deal with the things that you cannot predict, or that you can predict and that you need to be ready for. At the Internet Society, we have a platform which is called Pulse, pulse.internetsociety.org. And there is a very good a story about this West African cable cut. If you look for Internet Society Pulse and West African cable cut, you will find sort of an analysis there. But what we also feature on that is an Internet Resiliency Index. For each country, we have calculated an index. And in that index are parameters, derived parameters, about infrastructure. What are the number of IXs, the internet exchange points in a country? Because internet exchange points keep traffic local. And if you keep traffic local, and if an external connectivity in the form of a subsea cable breaks, the impact is lower and you're more resilient. What is the amount of networks in a country? What is the hegemony of certain networks? Is there one major transit provider in the country? One major telco that basically handles all the traffic with a few pieces around that? Or is it a nicely volatile environment? We look at security. Security is a proxy also for capability of the local community. We look at the performance of the networks, because also those are, you know, if you have more capacity in country, you might be able to deal more with breakages. And we look at market readiness. And market readiness also includes, for instance, indices that are about the openness of the regulation, the ability to establish new networks, the abilities to lay cables, terrestrial cables. And what we have seen in the continent, in the African continent, is the enormous amount of capacities that have been built over the last couple of years that allowed the West African community to deal with the power, with the breakage of those important cables. But the impact in the end was significant, but there was still internet, and people could still function and could still reach. And of course, I'm talking about the lower layers of the internet here. But what we also saw is that at the higher layers, people started to realize that they were, for instance, dependent on Microsoft infrastructure to do their work. And there again, having available infrastructure in the form of existing cables, of existing operator networks that people know how to find each other, and having the contacts available to route around the problems, those problems were solved later on the day on 14 March. So resiliency is about readiness, is about preparedness, is about understanding what can go wrong. And if you have that all in place, the internet itself will do a lot of magic to give it to you.
Right. Thank you, Ola. Very interesting. This interplay between the basic or the physical infrastructure and the protocols is an important topic, and I'm sure we'll come back to that as well, Ola. I would like to move on to our next panelist, Petra. You work for a company that doesn't own that much of the basic infrastructure, but that is still very dependent on it. So please give us your perspective on the topic.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for having me on this panel. It's really a very important topic also from Cloudflare's perspective. A lot of what Olaf said is also kind of in my speaking points. I guess it's also probably some of us will repeat ourselves a little bit on the topic of resilience, I think. From Cloudflare's perspective, as you say, you know, we run a global network which provides a number of services, including cybersecurity services for web properties, which basically needs a very interconnected network and a very resilient network. to that end, we depend a lot on interconnection, and that is really the kind of like core of how our network operates. We connect with over 13,000 networks globally. So we're probably one of the most well-connected networks in the world, and that is to make sure that our data centers, our points of presence that we have all over the world, can run our software with very, very low latency and very securely and very reliably. All those interconnections, as Olaf was explaining, is also to be prepared for any kind of unexpected events that happen daily, basically on a global scale. Of course, the internet was made to be resilient, but of course things can happen. Cable cuts can happen, other events can happen. And then, of course, from our perspective as a service provider, it's important that our network stays up regardless of what happens. So interconnection and finding different paths and that our network can actually route around the issues is very, very important. And that is also something that obviously our engineers are working on a day-to-day basis to make sure that that is the case. So this is one of the most, important aspects, I think, for us is that interconnection is not, let's say, disincentivized. And we see that obviously sometimes from a regulatory point of view or from a government approaches point of view, that's not always something that people think of, interconnections and peering and transit and other kind of ways to interconnect are really essential for companies, for governments, for anybody who is connected to the internet, to make sure that there are as many paths to follow as possible, which leads to better redundancy, it leads to more resilience, it leads to faster connections as well and lower latency. Some of the discussions that we see, and I'm obviously work in Europe, so I work in Brussels, so we talk a lot about the regulatory environment there. There are sometimes, ideas that are being brought forward in some debates in the policy space that are talking about, for example, paid peering, or kind of introducing payments in a system that usually is based on trust and based on settlement-free kind of relationships. As we know, this is, as Olaf also explained, that it's based on preparedness and engineers making sure that the connections are there that need to be there. So if, some parts of the ecosystem, in this case, large ISPs mostly in the European area, trying to say, there needs to be a contract, there needs to be payment, needs to be an additional cost for all networks to connect to each other. That obviously is problematic, I think, from our point of view, from a resilience point of view as well, because it can actually lead to disincentivization of interconnection. That you would not necessarily have more interconnection points if you would have to bear a lot of cost to do it. And I think it also goes against the kind of nature of the internet as a network of networks and a kind of organic way to connect to each other, and we all have an interest to connect to each other. So that's from my perspective, I think, one of the main issues to the topic of today.
Thank you, very interesting. And I think we'll also return to this point about the internet being built borderless and with incentivizing maximum connectivity and interconnections, and how that hopefully can continue to be the case, while also catering for other worries that people have about the internet. I would like now to move to our next panelist, which is Johannes. Johannes is not on stage, but he will come up here, I think, on the screen. Johannes, you work with the EU, who has who obviously shows a lot of interest in the internet, and has lately also been showing particular interest in the topic of subsea cables, which is a very important part of the basic internet infrastructure. So, Johannes, can you introduce us a little bit to the work you're doing there?
Johannes seems to be muted.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Now we can hear you, thank you.
Very well. Okay, well, thanks first of all for having invited me and the European Commission to this panel discussion. And perhaps before I go into some of the overviews, one comment, as already kind of now the topic was flagged a bit, and I think it's not perhaps the core topic of today, the question of peering and those types of issues, but the European Commission has an ongoing consultation on an upcoming regulation at the end of the year called the Digital Networks Act. So if you have views that you would like to contribute, now would be a good time to talk about that specific issue. So I will not touch about this later, as it's not perhaps the core of this panel, just since it was brought up. What we're doing in the unit I work on is we contribute to something that the EU published at the beginning of this year. It is a joint communication on an EU cable security action plan. So a bit to what Olaf said in the beginning, that its resilience is a cycle. There are several elements to it, and as policymakers, we try to have these elements on the radar, not least because there have been some incidents, in particular in the Baltic Sea, that rose the political limelight on this important topic and the resilience of submarine cable infrastructures. So when I talk about the resilience cycle, and here I would go a bit into its various elements, which are described in the action plan, you would have basically 4 to 5 points that cover this cycle, from prevention over detection, response, and recovery, up to deterrence. And the action plan tries to really tackle or propose some ideas and action on all of these points. The part that my unit is working most on is the pillar of prevention. And here there are, of course, several issues, transposing ongoing legislation, also developing new technologies, but in particular, and I'm happy later on to dive into some of these elements a bit more in detail, we have formed an expert group with EU member state authorities. That was done after already publishing a recommendation last year. And this expert group is supposed to deliver by the end of this year a mapping of existing and planned cable infrastructures, a coordinated risk assessment based on an overview of what are the existing threats, vulnerabilities, and dependencies, so also tackling economic security aspects. Then come up with a set of mitigating measures. We call that a cable security toolbox. Some of you might know that have worked in the field of 5G might know the 5G cybersecurity toolbox. So we try to kind of mirror that approach. And also having when I talk about risks, some of these risks could even be combined into scenarios that can then be stress tested, and there might even be funding for that made available from the EU budget. And then last but not least, we are funding already cables that have a difficult case, difficult economic viability. We have a program called the Connecting Europe Facility, and there's already hundreds of millions of euros going into this, and there will be further investments under this program coming up. But what the expert group will deliver on by the end of the year is a so-called list of priority areas of interest. We call them cable projects of European interest. Then, without going into too much detail into the other topics, when we talk about detection, it's all about how can we integrate more surveillance mechanisms that exist, connect more the data that's available, because there's a lot of data available. It's rather a question of how to bring it together and how to make sure it reaches the right addressees. And then also increased how technology can help with that. What about the role of drones? What about the role of sensors? So there's a lot we could discuss there. When we discuss response and recovery, it's a lot about repairing and maintaining the cables. So we have the issue of are there enough ships available? How good are these ships? How new are they? And we might touch on that a bit later. Who finances these ships? How profitable is it to work with them? But of course, also general crisis response frameworks, which are very important. And then finally, the whole deterrence block is really also about international relations, proactive cable diplomacy, It's of course sometimes difficult to attribute certain incidents because it's not always clear. So it's important to respect the international rule book that is in place, and then make sure that if certain of these incidents can be attributed, that the actors are held responsible, and to prevent future incidents in that on these types of infrastructures. But I probably stop here and happy to dive into details later on during the panel. Thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks, Johannes. And I think this topic of what the EU or governments do versus what these the owners of this infrastructure, which is often private, and how they work together is a key issue that we will touch more upon. Elisa, you have spent a lot of your life in working on the resilience and the security of internet infrastructure in various capacities. Can you give us your introduction to this topic?
Yes, thank you. And talking about, as you said, the important discussion about the cooperation between the regulators and the regulating side, and who is actually have to do this and have to live by it, and also have to provide the security that we need to have the trust in the internet services that we're now going to build up. So from going from the regulation that I worked a lot of year with the regulation, the regulatory side, it was always fascinating to see how this was something that was taken for granted or not even considered a problem in the beginning when I started about this, working with the resiliency. And then suddenly it was the main topic, for the trust in the internet services and the internet layer on top, because the internet is a very solid structure. As you said, it's also a net of networks, and this all, in IGF we always talked about how solid that is in itself, but we forget that internet is physical. It's not in the sky. It's not on your phone just driving around in the sky either. It is always linked to a data center, which is critical infrastructure. It's fiber, and it's networks, and it's cable, and it's undersea cables and everything. So, and what we have seen is that when we talk about the internet and the use of the internet and all the fantastic things that we can do on the top layer, developing internet services and building a lot of functions, critical functions in the community and in the society, is that there is now, as I at least experienced it from the government side, when something happened, it's zero tolerance for failure. Not only because we have critical services on top, but also because people are used to these services always being there. So you have zero tolerance for the services going down, and you have layers and layers of all private companies and everyone relying on each other, and in the end relying on the physical layer, on the bottom line. That is both power, and it is the physical infrastructure, data centers or cabling. So I think it's really interesting that when we talk about the development of the internet and all the possibilities that we have, which is basically the backbone of this IGF and these multi-stakeholder community discussions, we should also have thorough discussion on the physical infrastructure layer. And it needs to be a cooperation between the one who builds it, not only the regulating side, but the one who builds it and the one who uses it. And to not lose that perspective. And it's also a question about payment that someone of you spoke about, because it's going to be in this in the world today. There's more insecurity about how secure the internet connections are, and the fibering and the undersea cables and everything. And if we're going to secure it even more and have more redundancy on it, it's going to cost money. It's also going to cost money to build very secure and stable internet services in the data centers, that's going to tick and have enough power and have enough redundancy. And that has something to do with the whole cost picture. So maybe we need to realize that to build trust in the internet services, we should have the infrastructure layer more into the debate also in IGF forums, like we do today. But that has been somewhere missed in the past because we discussed more the internet itself and not the infrastructure around it. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Elisa. Erika, you represent one of the biggest players on the internet, I would say, who owns and operates a lot of this infrastructure. You've invested heavily in both data centers and subsea cables. So you build this resilient internet together with others, but a part of it. What is your perspective?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the kind invitation to join you today. You can hear me okay? Yeah, the last time I had a system like this, I was saying earlier to the organizers with headphones, it was in a cryptocurrency conference and there was very loud music playing at the same time. So I'm glad this setting is slightly more manageable. So as you said already, very rightly, Microsoft operates one of the largest global networks of fiber and subsea cables, and it also owns and operates a vast network of data centers around the world. We jointly own major submarine cable systems like Marea and also Amitié, which are transatlantic cables to ensure high-capacity connectivity between continents. These investments are designed to increase the geographical diversity of cable landings and reducing single points of failure and enhancing network resistance. Likewise, Microsoft Azure spans 60 or more cloud regions in over 140 countries, which houses data in over 100 highly secure facilities, which is at a scale that underpins the responsibility in safeguarding reliable and resilient internet infrastructure. So you asked me to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and risks that are at play, and the panelists have already outlined this very eloquently. But I'll focus first on data centers here as one of the backbones of the internet, which face their own distinct set of challenges. They require enormous, stable power supplies and cooling, hence power grid failures or extreme weather, including heat waves, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, and so on, can threaten operations. Physical attacks or sabotage are rarer, but not impossible. And as critical hubs, they could be targets for hostile actors or criminals. Even an accidental fire or a localized disaster at a large data center can knock out services for millions of users. Another often overlooked risk is geographical clustering. If many cloud facilities are in one region, a single regional event, a wide area blackout or an earthquake could affect them all simultaneously. Turning to submarine cables, they're of course also prone to damage from ship anchors, fishing activities, natural disasters, and also malicious tampering and sabotage. In sum, both cables and data centers are single points of failure in the digital economy and for users worldwide, if not made users of the internet, if not made resilient against these various threats. And these challenges really underscore why this discussion today is so vital and paramount. At Microsoft, we have a comprehensive approach to mitigating these risks at both the physical and logical network layers. We've built extensive redundancies into the network, deploying multiple cable pathways and diverse landing points so that if one link is lost, traffic can be rerouted to other alternate routes. Also, internally, we continuously monitor all network links for performance degradation or outages using advanced telemetry tools. And this early warning system, combined with predictive analytics, allows near-instant rerouting of internet traffic if a cable fails. In data centers, redundancy is critical. Azure regions are designed with availability zones, which are physically separate data centers with independent power and cooling systems to sustain operations, even if one facility goes down. Microsoft's data center architecture equally seeks to ensure critical services can fail over to alternate sites, providing high availability and disaster recovery capabilities. I was going to talk a little bit about our collaboration with government and stakeholders, but maybe I'll save that in the interest of time to the next round of questions. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Now we've gotten some interesting introductions and perspectives on this topic from our panelists. Before we move on, I would now just like us to move to Mentimeter, if we can get that up. So For you in the audience, let's see, do I control this one now? Yes. So we have a question for you. Oops. Which is a simple but open question. So several of the panelists now have touched upon several threats or challenges to the basic internet infrastructure. We would just like to hear from you. What do you think are the most important or challenging threats to against the basic internet infrastructure? So if you go to Mentimeter here now, you should get up like a small text form where you could enter your reply in a few short words, and they will show up here, and there will also be the possibility to, I think, give the different options a thumb up or a vote, so that we can get a picture of what if there's a consensus in the room, or whether there are opinions in all directions, which there might be. Excellent. So we get a lot of different challenges here. Several of you mentioned power outages, which are a major source of outages. There are answers along the attacks, both against BGP specifically, more general cyber attacks, malicious actors. Several of you mentioned topics having to do with governance, politics, regulatory fragmentation, and poor and conflicting legislation. All very good and interesting perspectives. Now we will go into some discussions, some topics. I have a few questions for the panelists. I assume you do in the audience as well. If you want, you can post some of them in the chat in Zoom. Or in a few minutes, you will also be able to do it here in the room in the microphone. If you are with us online, you will unfortunately not be able to speak your question. But if you put it in the chat, then Michael, our online moderator, will convey them here to the audience. We see from the topics brought up on the wall here, and several of you also mentioned it, this interdependency between the basic internet infrastructure, kind of in the middle, and other infrastructure that supports it in terms of power, in terms of repair capacity, in terms of civil works, and also the protocols on the higher level. So these parts all must work together. Olaf, you mentioned when we talked before this, you mentioned the notion of hidden correlation of risks. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so what when I said that, sometimes disasters happen at the same time. Power outage or a software problem that causes a power outage. Something that relies on the internet in the power center, that things that are related that you at some direct point do not see as related. For instance, a lot of people will make a risk diagram, likelihood, costs, and put things on crosses on that. And sometimes things might be a low risk, high cost, but almost always happen together. I don't have an example in this context, but this is something to think about when you are thinking about resiliencies and risks that you have within the system that you operate. I want to go back and say something about the things that we identified on the slide as being risk to infrastructure. As far as I can tell, all those things are relatively isolated geographically. A power outage is almost always with a geographic scope. The Iberian Peninsula as a more recent example. The internet as a system, as a global system on which we relied, has never seen an outage. And I think that very critical services should think about, for instance, that geographical spread that was talked about. Because that allows for catching up your back-end services at least. So you always have to think about what I'm protecting against, and what are the things that in your risk-based approach, what are the things that cause real harm and have a high impact. But when you do so, a flood may take out, or let's say an anchor might take out both a power cable and an internet cable at the same time. And that would be a sort of hidden correlation. That would be an example.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, so this is a more open question, and I think I'll start with you, Erika, but the others here feel free to add into this. So we discussed a bit earlier about call it the division of labor between the governments or the regulatory authorities on one side, and the large internet actors which you represent on the other side, who owns and builds and operates this. How do you work with these governments to secure this infrastructure? And on the tail of that, do you have a wish? Would you like to ask something from these governments? What could they do?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. We work very actively and proactively around the world in different types of partnerships with governments and other stakeholders, and in very much in local contexts as well with national governments. And so a key wish, that's a really difficult one, but I think I would say for governments to continue and perhaps do even more in terms of actively partnering with industry and with other stakeholders, civil society and so on, as the cornerstone of resilience. I really think that public-private partnerships should be embraced and are incredibly important here. I think there's a number of key elements to that, and again, the panelists have done such a great job of outlining some of these areas already, but I would say sharing the threat intelligence is a really important one in real time with companies to preempt attacks and vulnerabilities. As part of, giving an example, as part of industry coalitions, Microsoft contributes to joint risk assessments and also adheres to best practice standards for critical infrastructure. So I think working together with governments to get that right is very important, and have a kind of constant conversation and a trusted feedback loop is vital as well. I think second would be investing in redundancy, such as supporting backup subsea cables or extra data center capacity to eliminate these single points of failure that we've been discussing today is, again, a really important area. The third is the need for coordinating internationally so that cross-border issues like undersea cable repairs or common security standards are handled swiftly and collaboratively. And that, of course, is a big challenge in today's geopolitical climate, and it really underscores why meetings like these, I think, are very important as well for fostering trust and building those relations. And then I think a final one would be policy support. In the case of Microsoft, but also other companies, we've joined efforts to designate and treat key data centers as critical national infrastructure, which can help to facilitate better government support during incidents.
Excellent. I think, Elisa, you want to comment on that? I know this is right up your alley.
Yes, it is. We've been discussing this in Norway for years, how to share, the threat picture between the governments who sits on a lot of information. And it's been kind of a silo thinking in the past, because this is something that intelligence keep close, and they don't want to spread it. And then again, you miss out then on using all the power that sits on the companies and the infrastructure owners to dive in and actually help in a situation where communication is cut off, which is one of the basics that we need in every critical situation, as Ukraine also shows this morning how it really matters. So to trust each other and to make, some sort of formalized discussion between the companies and the government on that side is needed. And I think basically all governments are working on this now, in, at least as I know in Europe, that this is an issue. So this cannot be said enough times, I think, that we need this collaboration to be more thorough and even be like a baseline for preparedness and readiness in the community and in its society. So that I very much agree on, yes.
Any others in the panel who have a view? Johannes, you represent basically not a government here, but the EU as an important regulator, player here. What role do these infrastructure owners play in the interaction with you?
Yes, can you still hear me well? Seems to be the case. So indeed, first of all, when I think about the Metimeter question and government being mentioned or regulators being mentioned many times with a negative connotation, I hope at least as EU we try to make a positive contribution to the regulatory landscape, especially when it comes to improving coordination both between governments. So cross-border was mentioned, but also between governments and private entities. Perhaps a couple of points that I would like to make. So first of all, some of these exchanges are already formalized, in particular through recent legislation that came into force. To mention two, the NIS2 directive is one, and the critical, so that's about cybersecurity focus more, but it has a broader approach, also tackling some physical elements, and then the critical entities resilience directive. These directives really formalize the exchange, especially when it comes to incident reporting between private and public entities. So in the EU, these are really, although they are directives, they have to be transposed nationally, but they seek to kind of create a more harmonized situational awareness. Then, of course, when it comes to the funding side, there's also regular exchanges. I mentioned before already the CEF funding program, so Connecting Europe facility, because we see, of course, that there is a concentration. The market goes where it makes sense and where there's already a lot happening. If there is an internet exchange point, if the latency is short, then that's where you go. And those things are at times not necessarily creating increased resilience, because for that you need more redundancy and not necessarily more of the same. So it's important to strike there a good balance between the two, and that's why we have been investing under CEF already for quite some time. And actually currently there is still a funding round, we call those calls, ongoing, where the evaluations are taking place, and you will see some results in the next coming weeks and months, where again the submarine cables will be supported, especially in areas where the business case is not straightforward. And many times, some of you mentioned this already, these are of course consortia that come already together. They propose a certain project, and then it's co-funded, so it's not entirely from the public purse, but when private sector is going somewhere, they might need a bit of a bridging, a bit of support to bridge the viability gap, and that's what these funding programs are for. And then last but not least, of course, we are also in regular exchange with companies when it comes to any types of threat analysis and potential mitigating measures. I think Erika mentioned already some of the faults that may be related to submarine cable incidents. That's precisely the information that we, of course, are interested in, and that we also learn through our exchanges with private companies, who, by the way, are regularly invited sometimes to speak with our experts in the expert group. It's true that there is always then a certain realm of sensitivity, which makes it a bit harder to be, let's say, too forthcoming in what is being made public or not. But in any event, we try at least as much as possible to facilitate these exchanges. And so far, I would say it seems we have been on the right track with the proposals that we have put forward. When you read through the Cable Action Plan and also for the recommendation last year, you would see that many of the things mentioned are reflected quite well. Last point, because Olaf mentioned it, the cumulation of things that can happen. Take the power and telecoms cable cut. That actually did happen beginning of the year. So these are things that are really not in theory, they're happening in practice, and it's important to mitigate those types of situations. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Johannes. So I would like us to turn quickly to Mentimeter again. We have another question. Oops, we have another question for you. So moving from what are the challenges, the threats, what are the most important actions that governments and private companies and/or private companies can take to strengthen internet resilience? There's a question for you. Not a simple one, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And while you are typing in those, I would again like to encourage those who participate online to post your questions in the chat, and Michael will convey them. And then I have, of course, many questions in my head that I would like to get the answers from this panel, but I'm sure you do as well. So I very much hope that you in the audience will also raise your hand and take this opportunity to ask our panelists about this topic. Just seeing what comes up here that's an interesting one. Avoid national autonomy. That's an interesting topic. Some of the panelists might have words to say on that. Diversity is mentioned by several. Partnerships, collaboration, cooperation, education. Contribute to a redistributed internet, implying that it's not as distributed anymore, perhaps, as it was. I don't know. You might disagree or agree in that. So I think I'll leave the microphone open now, if in case any one of you has a question to pose. And while you prepare your question, I don't know, maybe one of you in the panel would have a comment on exactly this. Oh, sorry, here is the first question already. Let's go to you.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you very much. My name's Anuet Esterhuizen. I'm from South Africa, very much affected by undersea cable outages. I'm from civil society. My question is, none of you have touched on this particular topic. Whose responsibility is it to communicate to the end user that there's an outage and that there's an attempt to work around it? For an internet exchange point, the peering points will let their members know. Data centers will let their clients know. If you, in the case of a power outage, you would be informed by the power utility, or you'd have an app, like in my country, where the power goes down every other day, and there's an app that tells you, what the load shedding schedules is. But when it comes to internet outages, you essentially need a newspaper subscription to a business newspaper, which is not something that's available in the public at large. Most people get their internet not from ISPs, but from mobile data providers, and they are pay-as-you-go clients. They're not even contracted in. and you are completely in the dark as to what the status is. If you have fiber to the home, your fiber provider might update you, but they often actually don't. So that's my question. Is that something also in this partnership you're talking about between regulators, government and private sector to try and centralize in some way that there's active communication and interaction with the end user? Thanks.
So Elisa, you raised your hand, or Olaf, do you want to start, Elisa?
Yes, if it's an outage that is critical enough, obviously that's the government role to alert the one who's been affected by it. It will always be like that. So if it's severe enough, you will hopefully have systems in place so the government will react and also send out, and communicate with with what is available for the users. But it's also, the service provider, the one who gives the services, they also have, a clear, they also need to alert their users, but also the government, probably. So in my experience, if it's severe enough, and if it's enough individuals or companies or whatever that is affected, these are systems that should be put in place. That is why we should have, coordination and coordination between governments and private companies, and this put in place as a system up front, because it's both. It's not one or the other.
Oh yeah, Henriette, this is not a question to punt. I think it's an important question, but I'm going to return the question a little bit. Are you aware of any best practices that are executed anywhere on the globe? Because this seems to be a thing where through national IGFs, regional IGFs, something might percolate upwards and become best common practice. You're not aware. I see you shaking your head. Nope.
No, not for internet outages. I think for internet shutdowns, I think you now do have, to some extent, there are civil society organizations that monitor internet shutdowns, and they'll communicate that fairly widely. I think for power outages, you have at a national level, I think now, a much more structured approach. But I think for internet outages, and also it often doesn't, the way that undersea cables work, there is a lot of redundancy. So it doesn't necessarily affect everyone at national level in the same way. It depends very much. If you're in an academic network, you might have access to different cables to people that get their internet through mobile network. No, so Olaf, I'm not aware of good practices. And I think governments are not set up. I think many countries don't even have centralized communication about ransomware attacks or cyber breaches. Information regulators are getting better at making alerts about data breaches public, but this type of outage, infrastructure outages, I'm not aware of any, but maybe someone else in the room is.
Thank you. Michael, I think there's a question from the chat.
That's right. Hi. There is a question online. There's about 20 people that have been participating, and Vahan asked a question: should we create a tool for the governments and regulators so they can check how resilient is their internet infrastructure? And some of those tools that he said Olaf mentioned would be IXPs, regulations, interconnections. So I think some of this would be ways to strengthen it, but also if there are tools, and if you can fill in how that might look, that could help governments and regulators to determine how resilient everything is. Thank you.
I don't want to steal people's thunder, but pulse.internetsociety.org has a resiliency index which just maybe not measures it, but gives an index about the resiliency in country. That said, I don't want to flatten the discussion, because resiliency has to do with the complexity in the world that we live in. And even if we have a very resilient network or internet, still we might rely on, say, one provider of a specific application interface in order to get our work done. And if that application interface is down, a lot of stuff breaks. So resiliency is actually, for everybody, your dependencies will be different and the complexities involved are very important. So I think that if you go into resiliency for your systems, be it as a country, be it as an SME or a company, or maybe even for you at home, you have to go and do sort of the analysis, the risk assessment, and the tabletop exercises to deal with them.
Unless there is a question now, I just wanted to pick up, and I think, Petra, maybe this is for you to start on, but I was triggered a little bit by one of the statements, a couple of the statements from our Mentimeter here now. So, avoid national autonomy. I mean, you in Cloudflare are not particularly national. You are rather international, right? Would you agree with this statement, or is there more complexity to it?
Yeah, I saw that answer. I'm not exactly sure what the person kind of meant by it. I don't know if they're in the room or online, but I'm more generally about the also to the point of collaboration and cooperation that was mentioned. I think that's exactly where we would need to go, and where I think this discussion has kind of led to us already to say, the collaboration between governments, between private sector governments, between all actors that are basically responsible for making the internet, work and being resilient as it is. I think that's where we need to go, like national autonomy. I think obviously in the European context, we talk a lot about digital sovereignty, right, in these days, and there's obviously a lot of kind of policy discussions on things like data localization and things like that. They're all kind of related to it. I think from Cloudflare's point of view, and also I think from a internet resilience point of view, fragmentation is like the way that we shouldn't go. To make sure that resilience kind of stays as it is and is improved. I think fragmentation can lead to a lot of negative consequences from a resilience point of view. So I would not necessarily agree with that. I would agree with the fact that is one of the threats. I think is that they were mentioning, like the different decisions by different parts of government in different parts of the world. I think can lead to fragmentation. I think we need more forums to collaborate and discuss and to also come to kind of common solutions and share best practices. I think that's kind of where we need to go. And to your point on Pulse, which also collaborates a lot with ISOC on the Pulse side, on the internet shutdown side, maybe also to promote a little bit our radar dashboard, radar.cloudflare.com, which also gives you a lot of knowledge and information, I think, on what we see from a internet shutdown, also kind of disruption point of view from our network, which can also help civil society and others to kind of find out maybe more about what's going on in these cases.
Can I come on in on this one as well, Amund?
Absolutely.
Yes, no, I actually, when I was seeing the Mentimeter replies coming in, I was always thinking, okay, the toolbox writes itself, so we can lean back and it looks quite good. But jokes aside, those are precisely the points that we are first of all currently working on, that we are developing in much greater detail, of course, and without interpreting too much into the avoiding national autonomy. I think the point that can be made there is that the internet as such, but submarine cables, this is not a one-way, it's not a silo. There are always at least two parties connected to a cable, often more. There are consortia of various types of players coming together. They connect then to other types of players in a data center. So this is not a silo business, and I think that's something to keep in mind. Other points mentioned, which I found important to highlight, is the use of technology as well. I mentioned in the beginning that some of these new systems, they can really help with monitoring and detection. for example, distributed acoustic sensing, which can be applied to the submarine cables, can help here. We're actually putting together or would like to put together a roadmap at the European Commission to scope a bit what are these cutting edge technologies that one should keep in mind, and there will be some research funding available made for this. So have a look at the current Horizon Europe Work Program and at the action related to submarine cables, because that's precisely something we're going to look into a bit more in detail. And then lastly, what also popped up on the overview was the investment incentives. It's really important to keep those incentives high, but also to strike the balance not to crowd out private investment. There's a lot of private investment happening, and we welcome that very much, and that is essential. Without that, things wouldn't work. But there are some gaps here and there, especially when things get more in areas which are a bit less viable, and there are still some gaps here. The public authorities and the public purse can play an important role, and this is something we have been doing and continue to do so. Thanks.
Excellent. We are approaching the end of this session. There is still time and room for a question from the audience if you have one. But you have to be quick. No? So if there is not, then I would just like to take to round this up, to go a quick round again with our panelists to very briefly in 30 seconds. What is your takeaway or your message from this discussion? Is there an action? Is there as Lenin said, what needs to be done? Olaf, do you want to start?
I think awareness building is one part of it. Understanding your dependencies. I think that the parties at the left of me have a quite well understanding of their dependencies, although sometimes things break. Also looking at the left at me, one of the things that I'm very for, so to speak, is that when things break, you tell the world, and you tell that in a very transparent way, where you disclose or you tell a story about what were my dependencies, what did I know about those dependencies, and how can you, random other person who builds infrastructure, figure out whether you have the same dependencies that I had that broke and I didn't know about them. So it's about sharing information. It's about understanding your risks and the dependencies, that risk matrix, building that out, but also about practicing. And again, this is not only the large corporations, the Cloudflares and the Microsofts of this world. It's also the local data center in Oslo, or a small data center maintained by an SME that might have services running for, say, a hospital or another service, a logistical service that we may all depend on for getting our groceries in the store the next day.
Great, thank you. Petra.
Yeah, I mean, not so much to add. I think from my side, I think Olaf, I think you're very right on the transparency point of view, and I hope the Cloudflare is doing quite a good job in the rare instances that we do have, things to say about outages. There is always something. There is a learning that you take from everything that happens to your network. And then indeed sharing it, and making sure that others can learn and also prevent, things from happening on their own side is really key. I think from our perspective, I think the kind of the diversity of connections of the internet and the preventing of fragmentation is, I think, the two key points from our side when it comes to making sure that infrastructure and the internet as a whole kind of operates as it should, I think, and to the benefit of everybody in the whole ecosystem, businesses, end users, everybody who uses our services and other people's services on a day-to-day basis. We all rely on that physical infrastructure, and we all play a part in the chain. So that's I think the most important thing. And resilience really is a job that everybody kind of has to work together on continuously. I think that is also obviously something that kind of became clear from this panel that we all do. So.
Lisa, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, I'll be very brief then. I would just want to mention that national sovereignty or national autonomy, as somebody said, and international cooperation isn't in conflict with each other. They have to live side by side. I think everyone wants to cooperate as much as possible, and I think we will continue doing that. But I don't think see when we're so dependent on internet that we are today in democracies and societies. I think that it's naive to think that we can have one without the other. We need to think of them in parallel, and I think that's possible, very possible.
Erika.
Thank you. 30 seconds. I would end by saying that there are tremendous geopolitical challenges right now and threats to the multilateral order, and the UN remains as important as ever in this context. And so when we're thinking about the urgent need and the continued pressing need for partnerships, trust, collaboration, cross-border working, I would again emphasize that working in fora like the UN and bringing in all the relevant stakeholders is a vital one. And in doing so, we can then, of course, be thinking about all the types of agreements and monitoring and information sharing and so on. And I just wanted to also end with an announcement that was made by our Vice Chair and President Brad Smith in a recent, about a month ago, outlining Microsoft's European digital commitments. But one of the pillars, I thought you might be interested if you haven't seen it, is to uphold Europe's digital resilience even when there's geopolitical volatility. And I think that's a lesson also for a kind of global picture as well, in how important these types of commitments are across the board. Thank you.
Johannes, we have not forgotten you, but you only have 20 seconds.
That's fair. I have the feeling that from the discussion with what we're doing in the EU, we seem to be on the right track. I just could give you some of the flavors of what we have in store, but more will be coming, and we hope to also make some of these points public in the autumn. So stay tuned. Perhaps I'll leave you with that.
Excellent.
Thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you. That concludes our workshops. Thank you so much all for coming. It's been a pleasure, and please join me in giving our panelists a last round of applause. Thank you.
4.